Welcome to WVTC TV Network, capturing family moments in real time, bringing families closer together from the comforts of home. We are unleashing something different to the world. Start your subscription today for the low price of $4.99 per month or $55 annually. Go to www.wvtctvnetwork.com to sign up today. WVTC TV Network is streaming live on 8 different platforms. You can easily download the WVTC TV Network app on the Apple Store, Play Store, Roku, Fire TV, and more. Here at WVTC TV, we have access to movies that everyone can enjoy, including independent films, Sons of a Preacher and a Good Thing, Treasures of Life, the epic drama, The Passion of the Christ, and the box office hit Madagascar Escape to Africa. Remember, go to www.wvtctvnetwork.com and sign up today.
Good afternoon. Man, I'm excited to welcome you one more Wednesday afternoon to the Parson'S Porch. Welcome to the porch. The weather is good. There's a slight warm breeze blowing across our faces. And so we're excited that you've joined us this afternoon. Let me begin by saying our expected and marketed guest was unable to appear today, but I spoke with Mrs. Jackson last night and this morning, and she wanted me to offer her most sincere apologies for her inability to appear. She had made a commitment a few weeks ago, but she had a family emergency that she had to attend to today and will be with us in a couple of weeks. But and so I reached out because we've talked a number of weeks about ministers, their perspectives, how it is we approach and prepare our sermons to integrate current events as a part of the sermonic material. And we've talked about how we're going to move ahead. And so I thought the best way to do it, because most of the people we've had so far have been people with great experience, but they have low levels of energy at this point. Because they're in a different season. And I could not think of a better guest than one of my younger brothers and a great, powerful preacher, a wonderful pastor, who's now the new pastor at the Progressive Community Church in Bronzeville, a historic church. It was the church home of our first African-American mayor. Harold Washington was a member of Progressive Community Church, Pastor Tyrone McGowan. And I'm excited to have you, Tyrone.
Thank you, Pastor.
Welcome to the porch. Sorry, I don't have any iced tea or lemonade.
Got to come back next time.
Oh, absolutely, to offer you. And I keep promising people I'm going to have some lemonade or iced tea right here on the porch. It's so appropriate. I'm excited to have you. I've talked to a number of older pastors and ministers over the past few weeks, and we have been bemoaning the state of affairs from the perspective of a pastor who is sensitive to social action issues, social justice concerns, and of course would have some fear and trepidation about what we can expect in this political season. And I could not think of anyone once Mrs. Jackson had indicated she would not be able to appear. I'd already spoken to my counterpart, Dr. Jeanette Wilson, and got your contact information a few weeks ago because I wanted to get a youthful perspective, and I didn't want to be accused of having all these gray beards and old heads, on my show and not getting a perspective and opinions and the understanding of how you view things from where you stand at your age and with the experience you have, how have you been impacted? But just let me ask you a couple of fundamental questions. Just share with our guests and our audience today. Just some basic things about your ministry. If you want to talk about your training, your past pastorates, and your involvements in social active organizations, and your interest and your sensitivity to social justice. And then we'll get into some real conversation.
Well, first, thank you for having me, Pastor Parsons.
It's my pleasure.
It's such an honor to be on your porch and to have this important conversation.
Hey, well, thank you.
And our prayers are with Miss Jackson and the Jackson family, and we hope that she gets on the porch real soon.
Well, absolutely. We're saving a spot for her.
Yes. But again, thank you for having me. And I think this is such an important time. This is, last few days of Black History Month, and so important to have this conversation. But just a little bit more about me. Born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, South Side of Chicago. Grew up in the church, both sides of my family in the church. My church home growing up was First Unity Baptist Church, as you know,
right,
Reverend
right.
Dr. E.J. Jones.
Absolutely.
Powerful prophetic preacher in his own right. And I just always had the inclination to want to be in church all the time. Like my grandmother, Mary McGowan, my paternal grandmother, she would always just drag me along. She was a singer. So she would drag me along during the week to Salem District. She would sing and stuff like that. And I would just, accompany her.
Right.
And that just kind of just stuck and grew. And about 12 or 13, one of the associate ministers at our church, Congressman Bobby Rush, he had started a Bible study on Saturdays at the Dawson Nursing Home on 35th and Giles. It's a new name now. But one Saturday, I guess he got hung up in Washington. He couldn't make it. And I was there. And then everyone was like, well, you get up and teach and preach today. And so I did just that. And then halfway through my delivery, our pastor came and he took note of it. And he kind of acknowledged the call that was on my life at that time. And then Easter Sunday, that was 2001, I was 13. I announced my call to the church and preached my trial sermon in May 2001. Wow. And just kind of been on this course, this trajectory ever since. Growing up, a lot of time my grandparents' house, her side of the house, she'll have on 1390 on her radio station, on her radio. And my grandfather, he'll have on WVON.
Gotcha.
And so that kind of explains kind of my growing up.
On one side,
exactly.
And the gospel on the other side.
Exactly.
I got you.
And so just grew up and kept preaching, and a lot of great pastors such as yourself opened up your pulpit to help me experiment. And went on to Morehouse College. I was at Whitney Young High School, Morehouse College, majoring in political science. And then at Morehouse, I was a part of the chapel assistance program with Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr. So this is like my first time now.
I remember Dr. Dean Carter's my friend.
Yes. My first time around young preachers, 18, 19, 20. We were wrestling with the same issues, things like that. And that was just changed my trajectory. I was going to come back home and go to Moody Bible Institute or something, which is nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But Dean Carter pushed me and stretched me and was like, no, you can go to Harvard, you can go to Yale. And I didn't know they even had divinity schools. I knew they had law schools and policy schools, med schools, but not divinity schools. And so I went on and applied to Yale Divinity School and learned other great people went there, like Dr. Franklin Richardson.
Absolutely.
Dr. Otis Moss III, who I would later work for at Trinity United Church of Christ as associate pastor. And then came back home to Chicago and started working. A lot of the same communities that helped form and shape me. I was called to a church not far from where we are now in Robbins, Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, where I was there for about 9 years. Concurrently there, I was serving with at Rainbow Push as the national field director for Reverend Jesse Jackson. And so just for 3.5 years, just amazing experiences. At the height of the Flint water crisis, we were there almost every day.
I remember.
We were Standing Rock in that crisis there. And everywhere in between, out in Sterling in Louisiana, Philando Castile in Minnesota, we were on the ground everywhere. So that just really gave me, being Reverend Jackson showed me that, the world is your pulpit, not just on Sunday morning, but, you read about these stories or watch them on CNN, but to be literally there in the room with, Governor Tim Snyder or Mayor Weaver there in Flint, Michigan, to be in the room like this as they're discussing, the next steps, how we're going to get through this crisis, it was just transformative at a young age. Then also be at, to go to corporations like Coca-Cola, go to Google with Reverend Jackson as a shareholder and just see how that process works. Being in a room like this with Mary Barra, her office at General Motors at, 28, 29 years old was just unbelievable. Then, of course, worked at Trinity, United Church of Christ, and then got called to where I am now, Progressive Community Church. And I'm happy to be there. I'm also 1 year away from finishing my law degree. I was deciding to going to get a DMin or a law degree. So I just went the legal route. And I think now it's very fitting that I have that component to my education. So it's been a long journey, but grateful for people like you and Reverend Wilson and Reverend Jackson who've helped push me and nudge me here or there to get where I am today. So.
Well, I'm excited to have had an infinitesimal contribution to your growth and development. And the one thing I noted while you were talking is that people who are not intimidated or people who are not afraid of the gifts and talents God has given them are usually found trying to donate their intellectual contributions to other people, always mentoring. And as I listened to you, I could only reflect on my early encounters with Reverend Jackson, which really suggests that he has a wonderful pattern for mentoring and introducing the people he come in contact with, and he identified that they have these social sensitivities beyond their awesome spiritual gifts or whatever they are thought to be. I met him at 17.
Wow.
I was sitting at a table. We were in H&H restaurant on 51st Street.
Oh, wow.
And someone told him, well, he's a boy preacher. And I had just left an appointment a Sunday afternoon at a church called Mount Olive, right across 71st and Cottage Grove. The preacher was Pastor Hall, I believe. And we left there and went to H&H to eat after the afternoon service where I preached. And he came in, and our friendship began there.
Oh, wow. And
as I listened to you, I thought about going to my first trip out of town with him was down in the Paradise Valley. There was a shooting with some people who were part of a kind of an offshoot religious group, but they had moved from Chicago and they were African American to Arizona.
Oh, wow.
And there had been a shooting with the sheriff and some other law enforcement people in that community. And I'm thinking I was at my first church in Gary, Indiana. So it was like 69 or 70 because I went there in 67. And we were met Governor Babbitt was the governor of Arizona at that time. His name was Babbitt. There was a black funeral director who had offered to fly us on his plane from the Capitol to Paradise Valley.
Wow.
And we got on his plane. It was really small. But now Governor Babbitt had offered the governor's plane to go to Paradise Valley. And once we got on the plane, Reverend Jackson said to the undertaker, "Are you sure we're not going to be business for your establishment if we get on this plane?"
I've been on one of those planes with him too.
Fly down to Paradise Valley. And something happened with the starter on this guy's plane just before we left. And he and I and Pastor Warren Stewart from Phoenix, Arizona, were all together. And we decided it would be safer for us to go on the governor's plane.
Yeah.
And that began my whole career, meeting people like Isaiah Thomas and stuff in rooms with the NBA, just every place.
Yeah.
And all kinds of people, Ruth Bowen, Crown Booking Agency, just knowing everybody, who really considered him to be kind of much a national pastor at that point. And so to have the idea that here's the person who is so celebrated, but who's trying to give what he has intellectually to other people, that's how you extend your mortality.
Yeah.
You can't live forever, but your thoughts, your ideas, your perspectives, and influences can definitely transcend the grave. And that's so important. Well, now we fully understand, how you got to the point of being socially engaged and socially involved, and then to hear of your continued growth and development intellectually, academically, and as a pastor, and now to know also that if I go to court at some point in time, once you get past the bar, I can call you to preach and plead my case.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm excited about that. We can use those gifts. I had a young man one time who had been telling me he wanted to be a preacher, right? He was probably about 9 or 10. But when he got about 15, he said, Pastor, man, I got to change my mind, because he talked to me every Sunday. I said, what happened? He says, I think I want to be an astronaut. I'm not going to be able to be a preacher anymore. I said, yes, you could. You could have First Baptist Church Luna.
Exactly.
And I said, so you can be a preacher on the moon. You don't have to stop preaching. You need, we need some gospel on them. He said, that's a good idea. Well, I haven't heard anything about it because they moved away. So I'm not sure whether, I know he didn't become an astronaut.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe he did become a preacher.
Yeah.
But to have, this interest and this contagious hunger for information and the capacity to be able to speak critically in the public square in defense of the community and in defense of the undefended, I think is a powerful testimony to the kind of person you are, the level of sensitivity you have. And it definitely speaks, of course, to the environment and the influences in which you were brought up. One of my concerns, and I've been talking to a lot of preachers about it, is how are we going to move forward ministering and preaching in these days? Recently, I've been reading a book that I'm going to recommend to people. I didn't have it on my list today, but I'll list it next week. It's by a brother named Stroud, who writes this book about preaching in the shadow of Hitler. And so it is about the sacrifices and the sermonic approach that these people had, knowing that Hitler spoke about Christianity, but he was trying to depict it as a nationalistic, racistic religion, pretty much the same situation that we are dealing with at this junction in American history. And so I think it is really an informative book, because some of the sermons that are included in the book, beyond the documentary comments and notations throughout the book, are from people who were literally hung the next day after they preached, or people who were killed the following week after they had a sermon that was anti-fascism and a sermon that was anti-Hitler. And this book has recently been published, and I think it is such a good read for anyone who's interested in how you're going to move through this period, or when you see all of the things that those who came before us and the people upon whose shoulders we stand were fighting for us to have, and they're being swept away in a fatalistic kind of hedonistic sweep of a pen with executive orders and removing all of the level qualities of the American playing field and enterprise, industry, business, education, and on every level, not to mention the disbursement of funds with some level of equality and equity based upon the contribution of the community or the size of the population. All that stuff is being taken away. And so how are we going to preach going forward, and what we're going to preach? And beyond that, in your own conversations with people who you would consider, and I would probably consider in your peer group, what are the kinds of conversations you guys are having at this point?
Yeah, that's some heavy questions, Doc. I think this is particularly for people in my generation. They would always say, "Man, I wish if I was alive in the '60s and the '50s, I would have been there with Dr. King or there with John Lewis." Well, this is our moment now. This is our time. Right. Whatever you're doing now, you would have been doing back then. So if you were just at home on Twitter, on Instagram, just being a social media activists, you would have just been on the sidelines back then. And so this is our moment to really engage and bring the whole totality of our gifts to fight. We have to literally put our bodies on the line to fight this, our souls, our minds, our spirits. And what do we preach? We preach what Jesus preached. Jesus, you look at the Bible is every chapter, every verse of the Bible is written under some form of oppression, Egyptian oppression, Roman oppression, Babylonian oppression. So the Bible is a political, it's not a book, it's really an anthology. You're holding a collection of books.
Right.
And so it is inherently political. And so you go to what Jesus, his first sermon, Luke chapter 4, he said what he came to do, his mission statement. I've come to preach good news to the poor.
Yes, sir.
That word poor in the original language, in the Greek, patokos, those who were made poor.
Right.
Right. No one wakes up one morning and says, I'm going to be poor. No one aspires to be poor. That word made poor means that some external force, some external policy
caused their poverty.
Exactly. So what we're looking at now, cutting the social safety nets, cutting people's Medicaid, literally firing people, hundreds of thousands of people. That's families, that's communities, right? So you're just not firing one person. You're literally putting people in poverty, pushing people further into poverty just to enrich yourself. You look at, I read somewhere, it's probably more now, but since the election, since November, Elon Musk, he's already richest man in the world. He's made since November, I believe, another $300-something billion added to his already amassed net worth,
Well,
just from the election.
A part of that income is $8 million a day from the federal government, based on sales of EV cars and those compensations they help consumers to purchase electric vehicles. So while he's cutting everybody else and displaying this chainsaw, and CPAC, well, he's taking in $8 million from the same government that he's bemoaning other people are getting rich off of.
Exactly. So you're getting rich off the government, but you can't let these people have their jobs while you're going around with a chainsaw and sending emails on what did you do the last 5 days? And this is a person from South Africa who came here on a HB1 visa, who's trying to tell us so he's bringing that apartheid mentality. He and these other billionaire bros, his cronies,
the
oligarchs, yes. And they've literally overtaken the Oval Office. They've overtaken Washington. And we have to fight this. We have to resist. And I think the church, our faith is the perfect place to do that. I look at people of my generation, just here locally in Chicago, Tanya Lozano, the late Slim Coleman's daughter, same age as me. She's doing tremendous work in Pilsen. That's a community that's
Slim was a great guy. He's one of my friends. I love Slim.
Yes, great family. And she's carrying on that lineage and that legacy. Protecting her community, literally sheltering them from the attacks of ICE and the raids that are coming. People are afraid to go to the grocery store. They're afraid to leave their home. So she's literally feeding people. Her church is doing so much work, not just on Sunday, but literally every day of the week. They're doing something to literally, what good is it to believe in a God, to say you're saved by grace or by faith, but then you can't even go outside and breathe fresh air, And so she's literally, her ministry is so holistic in many ways. And she's literally saving people's lives every day. Look at my other brother, Marshall Hatch on the West Side, Marshall Hatch Jr., his organization, I can't think of the name of it at the moment, but it's dedicated to young males trying to end that kind of prison to pipeline. That revolving door. Exactly. That revolving door to get. And so, there are people like me who are on the ground who see the church not just active on Sunday, but literally it has to function, it has to be relevant in people's lives, after the benediction, all the way till we get back together again that next Sunday. We have to have something. We have so much space in our churches. The pandemic taught us, what are we doing with our space? Can we use our spaces more than just to be used for Sunday school classrooms on Sunday morning? How are we engaging with the broader community?
Right. I agree with you. I make that point often over the period of my lifetime in a lot of challenges to churches and pastors. How do we interact with the community? That's important. But while there are a lot of people who I think across the nation who are engaged in some levels of programmatic offenses to help eliminate poverty, to help unwed mothers, teenage mothers, et cetera, et cetera. But while they help the individuals, they're unwilling to publicly defend these individuals against the powers that created the problems that they're trying to fix in the first place. See, while there are a lot of people who will help people when they come out of prison, but they won't protest against the system that sent them to prison. And they won't talk about the prison industrial complex. And so my concern is, you know, a lot of what we do in the community is based upon our humanistic sensitivity. But I believe that if you are a pastor, a preacher, a spiritual leader, within one of the first things I learned early in my ministry was that how I saw God would determine how I interacted with people. And to put it, you know, in a small slogan or phrase, of course, the phrase is, your theology should inform your sociology.
Right, right.
And so what is happening is, while there are a whole lot of good people who really want to help people, I know a lot of churches and pastors they're feeding people, but then they won't talk to the powers that created the hunger in the first place. They are fearful, or they think that politics and their spiritual calling are two separate entities, and they should not have any commingling in their sermonic presentation. So there are a lot of people who are blessed by the compassion of pastors, but they don't have pastors who defend them from getting in the posture in the first place. They are afraid to speak truth to power. They're good people and they help people, but you can't find them any place saying anything against the government or believing that anything is wrong with what's about to happen. And so my concern is, if the pulpit, the press, and the people are the axis of power in the country in the past, and if the Black church has always been looked to, my concern is the Black church that we celebrate now is more historic than current. The Black church that we talk about is almost non-existent. And so I'm wondering, how did the Black church of the past become an endangered species?
That's a whole dissertation project. It's a great question. And I think, you know, you could probably track it, like the decline, like after the civil rights movement, this kind of rise and emergence of Ronald Reagan. And, you know, you could probably look at how, you know, faith-based initiatives, faith-based grants, you know, these pastors wanted access to the White House, access to government. You know, you could probably track the decline somewhere around there. But I think more broadly, I think you do yourself a disservice as a preacher, as a pastor, as a believer, when you try to separate yourself or divorce, you know, your spirituality from politics, particularly in the Bible. You can't separate it. When you look at the Lord's Prayer, it's a political prayer, right? Give us this day our daily bread. Jesus was talking. His audience was literally poor peasants who were literally trying to see how they were going to eat under the oppression of Rome. Exactly. Hallowed be thy name. Caesar's name was hallowed, but Jesus was saying, no, there's a name above Caesar's name, right? And so we have to, you know, when you talk about mass incarceration, Jesus was incarcerated. We served it. You know, he was under the Roman soldiers arrested him. Look at Paul, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, was in prison. He was in Rome's prison industrial complex. So you literally cannot read scripture and if you ignore these issues, you're not authentically and fully grasping what the text is teaching us and trying to teach us for our context today. And we miss a whole dimension. We miss a whole dimension of what the writers are trying to tell us if we ignore that.
Well, I agree with you. You know, one of the tracks that I have been, and trends and the causative factors that I've been trying to investigate, and I've invited Dr. Brian Smith from Chicago Theological
Oh,
Seminary.
yes. Good brother.
To come and be on my show one day.
Yeah.
Because I tend to believe that it is the introduction of a lot of continental and European theological perspectives. And not only that, but the influence of racism in the theological perspectives in the seminaries where many of our preachers and pastors have been trained within the context of a Southern Baptist theological perspective. And so when you see a theology that idolizes complexion and race, not overtly, but they do it stealthily, silently, or invisibly. But if you have any keenness in your discernment, then you can see through, and the transparency is not there. And so my concern is that we have pastors who are so obsessed with prosperity, presentation, or people who are connected politically, who don't want to offend their connections because they're able to get a few favors. And one of the questions I asked on an occasion to a brother who said to me, well, the alderman is a good friend of mine. And I don't want to offend the alderman or hurt his feelings, because then what am I going to do when one of my members needs something? And so I said to him, well, if what you have to say one day would offend the alderman, and you have to weigh that against saving the job of 50 of your members, would you speak in favor of your members, or would you shut up to save your relationship with the alderperson?
Wow.
And so that's pretty much you giving up the defense of the people who are really supporting your lifestyle, and you're supporting your family for a relationship based on hams or a street sign that nobody can use as a real address.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't care your name on the sign. Can't nobody put it on an envelope. And so we've been co-opted and compromised, beginning with those faith initiatives you talked about with Ronald Reagan and invitations to the White House, etc. But my concern is, how do we move the needle? Because we are fighting a serious battle that's not a political battle. The battle that we are fighting is a battle that is sponsored by the people on the other side of the church aisle from us. They are the white church who want to make people think the black church is just a reflection of the white church, dumbed down, and a caricature of white church. We just more animated, and we do a little shouting and act a little extra, Africanesque. And we brought some habits, from our slave ancestors into the church. But otherwise, we are just the other part of the white church, when in fact, we're the exact opposite. We are a reaction to the white church. We're not a reflection of the white church. We are a reaction to them, and we are an opposing cosmological view theologically. We view the world completely different from the way the white Christian evangelical church, or white churches pretty much, view the world. One of the issues I always have, and the one I have at this moment, is how do you harness 77.8 million people to vote, and 85% of the Christians, white Christians in the country, vote for a regime, an attitude, and a platform that is without any mercy, compassion, interest, or concern for humanity as a whole. But as you've already lifted up, this is about the rich getting richer and eliminating. It's really about the rich against the poor. If you see where they're going with this, this is about the people up here saying the people down here don't need handouts. But these are the people who getting all the money. And I've always tried to figure out, how do you convince a person, and no disrespect meant, with 3 teeth in the front, a person living in a camper, they got a hole in the camper, and the only thing keeping the air out is a "Make America Great Again" sign.
Wow.
And you get their vote, and you never promised them, "I'm gonna put a dentist in your neighborhood." You never promised them, "I'm gonna give you money to get your teeth fixed." You never say, "We're gonna make sure you don't have to drive 2 hours to a hospital because you're up in the mountains of Kentucky." So what you understand is they are not voting for policy.
Definitely.
It's not even about righteousness, it's about whiteness.
Yep.
And so how do we challenge or change this trajectory, and how do we get your peers and even mine, who have much less to lose in terms of relationships with people, because your influence at this point, if it hadn't built you a base of power where you can function with some level of independence by the time you get 70, well, then you're never going to be free anyway. And so my concern is, it's hard to find younger pastors and ministers and brothers and sisters who are willing to take positions about what's happening in the country at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to interview and talk to people to find out why most of our younger people are looking away. And we have a lot of young Black people who are now trying to say they're conservative Blacks, and they're conservative. And the last time I checked the definition of a conservative, well, to conserve means to maintain something as it was and to try to keep it like that as long as possible.
Exactly.
And so if you're a conservative, that means you are an agent of conservation.
Exactly.
And so if you are an agent of trying to maintain things that they've always been, what is it a Black conservative has to conserve?
Now, these are great questions. I think, and you hit the nail right on the head. I think this is, Paul said it best. This is a spiritual battle. This is spiritual wickedness in high places. This is more than a political battle. This is, but I believe in the words of Jesus in John 11. This sickness is not unto death. I believe America is sick, is gravely sick, but just like Lazarus, I believe I still have hope. I still have hope that we can revive and we can get back on track. And it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of effort. But I think you touched on a lot of things I want to try to respond to. I think, Vincent Harding spoke about this, or wrote about this in a lot of his texts. Great Vincent Harding, great African-American church historian and scholar. Yeah. He talks about how, like, African-Americans, we were given Christianity as they took us from and put us on slave ships across the transatlantic. They gave us this profaned version of Christianity, but we, in many ways, we turned Christianity around. They gave it to us in a perverted nature, but we kind of made it right, and we made it inclusive. We did that in the visible institutions. We did that in the slave harbors. The slave masters gave us this religion: slaves obey your masters. But we went to Exodus, let my people go. Right. And we have to go back to that foundation to say, no, this is a principled religion of liberation. This is a principled liberation of justice. How can you claim, he said at a prayer breakfast, the national prayer breakfast, we're bringing God back. How can you bring God back into America when you are literally doing everything against what the Bible says? Take care of the poor, take care of the widow, take care of the orphan, take care of the stranger, because you were once a stranger. And you're doing the complete opposite. So really, your God at this point it can't be the God I serve. It has to be greed, capitalism, and avarice, rugged individualism. That has to be your God. It can't be the God that I serve. It can't be the God that I learned about growing up at First Unity, 51st in Indiana. It can't be the God that I heard you preach about every Saturday morning, watching you with my father before I went to Operation Push on Saturdays, right? It's too incongruent. It cannot be the same God. It's about greed. It's about capitalism. And we have to stand in contrast to that.
Well, I guess my message is, the thing that disturbs me is, I understand that 85% of white Christian evangelicals did not come to these positions easily. So what that means is the Christian Leadership Roundtable that had its origins in Dallas, Texas, with a whole lot of Southern Baptist pastors, and their first meeting to see how they could integrate contributions, donations, funding, and impact the policy of the nation with a whole lot of major politicians. And that was, of course, the first beginning of this relationship that only grows.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people believe that politicians have moral positions, but they do not.
Yeah.
Politicians don't have any moral positions about transgenders. They don't have moral positions about pornography. Politicians don't care who goes to the bathroom with who. These are all positions that are articulated by the people who fund the politicians. And that's the white Christian church.
Yeah.
So my position is this. If these people are able to convince and persuade 85% of their congregation to vote for a person who is the direct opposite of everything they consider morally correct and upstanding. If it's divorce, if it's wives, if it's assault, if it's convictions, if it's felonies, if it's blasphemy, if it's being an agnostic, if it's being ungodly, everything, they were able to vote. So I hear you saying that we have to get back, but how do we get back without a leadership that's focused on it? And how do we get the leadership to just change their mind with the conversation we're having if they don't have anything to contradict the theological parameters they've adopted for how they do their sermons?
Yeah, I think it goes to education. We have to inform ourselves. So we talked about Ronald Reagan. What came of age during the 80s, the Heritage Foundation, very right-wing conservative organization. A lot of what we see in Project 2025 which was produced by the Heritage Foundation. The person over the Heritage Foundation, he was just confirmed as to be over the White House Budget Office director. So literally, and you can look at a lot of these executive orders, these 300 or so executive orders, they're literally verbatim text that was lifted from Project 25, and he just literally wrote his name on the bottom. So this is what has been in place for some 40 to 50 years. And it was like the perfect storm, perfect marriage. They really, they really didn't care about GOP didn't really care about Trump, but when they saw he was gaining traction, they just latched on to him, and it was like a perfect marriage. And so they were waiting 40 years to strike down Roe v. Wade. They've been waiting for this moment for 40 years. And I think we can learn from them and how to be strategic. Like, you look at what every movement they've had, the Tea Party movement, now this MAGA movement, how they're getting things done in Congress, even though we don't agree with what they're doing, the other side can learn from how they're getting things done, right? To push things through, push their agenda through, and that want to have an agenda, even though it's a 4+ decade agenda they've been trying to get through over all these years, to have an agenda, to have a playbook. What is our playbook as a Black people? What's our playbook as the Black church? What are we going to do besides preach every Sunday? Like, what organizations are we going to partner with? What institutions are we going to help give 10 or 20% of our offering to a year? Like, what is our plan going forward? I think that's kind of where we are now. So you see a little bit of this now happening with like the boycott that's supposed to happen on the 28th. Some other people, Dr. Jamal Bryant's having a boycott with Target. I think Nan, Reverend Sharpton is having a boycott. He's going to announce a big one later on in April at his convention. But yeah, so we're doing these disjointed things, but what are we going to do collectively together to have a greater impact and to move us forward, like they have, like the other side has?
Well, see, I go back to this question, because I agree with all the things you've just said. But when you talk about MAGA and you talk about how they push their agenda, but these are the political operatives. See, my concern is putting a light on the fact that the political operatives are not the organic source of 2025 project or the initiatives that are being sponsored and pushed by these politicians. Of course, they have to have a political arm, but my perspective is that the Republican Party has just become the social action ministry of the Christian Evangelical Church. So my question and my quest is not to imitate or emulate the political efforts. My quest is, how do we get pastors on the same page like they did? You see, because it's not MAGA that's responsible for what MAGA is doing. It is the white preachers and the white Christian leadership roundtable and white evangelicals. My question is, once again, if they can get 85% of their congregations to go out and vote for somebody who is anti everything they preach in church on Sunday, how do we counteract that? And it's not going to be with a political organization, because most Black preachers don't even think white preachers are political. It is so invisible and done with such finesse. We have been co-opted to think, well, they're doing great and they don't get in that political stuff, but they're running the political stuff. And so my position is, we're not here to counteract MAGA. We're here to counteract the sponsors. See, I've always had this position. If you're going to eliminate the mosquito, don't spend all your money on the spray. Spend some money on getting rid of the swamp next to you. And when we deal with MAGA, when we talk about these political operatives, all we're doing is spraying the mosquitoes. See, the swamp is where the thought comes from. The swamp is what created the politicians and their agenda. So our fight can't be, well, look what MAGA did. It's got to be, look what these preachers did. And then how do we call them out and expose them? Do we get pastors, for instance, because we got a lot of descriptions, but we got a few prescriptions. How can we get ministers, for instance, to donate $500, $1,000 to publish an open letter from Black pastors of the Black church in America? If we talk about the Black church, most people don't have any idea that we're not just talking about my church around the corner or my Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, or, Truth Ground and Pillar, so forth and so on, with all these different names. We're talking about major denominations. And so, number one, we're talking impossibility and incredulity. We talk about the Black church getting together. That means Methodist, Church of God in Christ, they do better than everybody else. We write more right than you, organization. I mean, this is never going to happen. It's fantasy. So what are the basic things we can do to say to people, for instance, we got a lot of white friends. We talk about reconciliation. I want to know, how come white churches can't say racism is a sin? My next question is, when I read Matthew 25, who do white people think are the least of these? Because if you can turn away millions of people from your border barefooted with their kids on their neck who walk 1,000 miles and call them invaders, I want to know from the white church, who are the least of these? When you read the Bible and says, whatever you do in the least of these, you do also unto me, in 2025 church, white church, who are the least of these? Why can I look at evangelical churches on TV who are in Africa feeding little white kids with flies, Black kids with flies around their mouth and their nose and their head, like I'm concerned about Black people and I love all people, but there are Black kids around the corner from their church who look just like the ones they fly to Africa to feed. And so you have to ask yourself, why won't you feed and bring a light on the Black people who are poor in your country? The answer to that question is, I answered. I'm glad you asked. The answer to that question is, when you have been told all your life that Black people are lazy, trifling, and don't want to work. So a judge in Michigan, in Oakland County, Michigan, no more than three weeks ago, was fired because the prosecutor, who was her friend, that she was also interested in a relationship with, decided to tape some of the crazy things she said after they went out to eat and they had a couple of drinks. One of them was, the black folk from other countries are hard workers. The reason I give all of the N-word people in this country a hard time because they're all lazy, trifling, and they want everything for free. What I'm trying to tell you is that's the only way for any Christian who calls themselves a Christian to pass through a black neighborhood going to their white mega church and see all of you on the street and see your houses messed up. How can I go to church and not question and ask myself, why are these people like this and we are like this, unless I have been preached to all my life? They like that because they want to be, because they lazy, because they trifling. You see, that's the first disinformation that we got to fight.
Yeah, it's Dr. King said it's the most segregated hour in America. It's 11 a.m. on Sunday morning. It's still today to be true.
Well, not only is it true, but I want to know, how can it be segregated and we got the same Christ? And you don't think that these are the least of these. My perspective is the church should be at the border with coffee, with juice, with blankets, saying, welcome. You're not an invader. You leaving bad situations. You are the people that the Bible says, mind how you entertain strangers. You are the people Jesus was talking about when he said, when you do something to the least of these, you do it also unto me. So I want to know where the black preachers who are willing to ask the white pastors and the white church, who are the least of these, and how is it you can just cancel out all the poor people in this country and say they're all trifling, they're all lazy. That's why we don't want to help them. But we'll fly missionaries 2 days to feed some people in Africa that we don't know, and we ignore it because we don't want to bring attention to the fact that the folk we support are pushing policies that don't benefit the people across the street or around the country, around the corner from my church. If I go around the corner and start feeding these black people in my neighborhood and in my city, then folk all over the world gonna want to know, why are they hungry in the richest country in the world? So how can we be quiet and talk about what the black church is going to do when in fact we're the most silent voices? We don't even have an organization where the president or the leader is ever on a stage to represent the mind or the heart of God. And when we talk about how revered, how reverent we look at King and Martin and Howard Thurman and all those people, but everything they organize and touch is in intensive care or on life support. So that's just lip service. How do we correct it?
And I was talking to Pastor Jamal Bryan in October. I saw him. He said something interesting that stuck with me. He was like, after in the midst of the Jeremiah Wright, Barack Obama situation, 08, 09, 07, 09, really, there was no person from the Black prophetic liberation tradition that had like a platform. You had the TBNs and the Benny Hinn's of the world, like they had their voice, but there was no one from that school, no one from that tradition who publicly had a public platform to really combat, right, the narrative and the attack that was coming toward the Black church. And there was like a wasted opportunity in many ways. And we're still reeling from that because there hasn't been a platform to really go toe to toe to really address and hold the white church, the white evangelical church accountable for their sin. Like we haven't had that conversation. And so I think I agree with you 100%. Now, you're right. You're hitting the nail on the head in many ways with what we need to do as Black pastors, as the Black faith community come together. I mean, it's hard enough to get like the 4 historic Black Baptist organizations to come together, let alone like the Methodists, the Kojic and CME, all that. But that's what needs to happen at this moment.
Well, I think it's only going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen like top down. No organizational leader has the audacity or the courage because they believe they putting their whole organization's future and sustainability on the line. And so it's got to be training groups of preachers and pastors. No organization. That's just, for me, a prophetic fantasy. That if we expect the conventions to decide, if we got to train our preachers for social justice, man, this is never going to happen. You can die and come back again. And so could I. And I don't have that kind of optimism. I think it has to start in a granular form, organically, from the roots up. Everything happens from the roots up.
Yeah.
And my other issue is we intellectualize a whole lot. But my question would be, what percentage of Black people was in Benny Hinn and TBN's audience? And so I don't have to counteract the 5 or 10% of Black people who are watching that. So I can't agree that the impact of what we are going through is based on nobody to deal with them, because I don't think, especially the younger Black people, wasn't watching no TBN or Benny Hinn. So how can that be an explanation? Jamal, come on my show and explain it.
Yeah, come on, Jamal, come to the porch.
Absolutely. I'd love to have you come to the porch. And he's a friend of mine, by the way. He calls me the Godfather, but I still disagree.
And so I think this is what Rainbow Push now is doing with the School of the Prophets, having these weekly sessions with clergy, with political leaders, civic leaders, activists, weekly, to get a game plan together. I think this may be the new model, like how to at least get a game plan forward to do what we're talking about, counteract like what the white clergy has done so effectively.
Well, I think that's important, and I think that's where it all begins. Listen, thank you all for joining me. I appreciate you, a Reverend, a pastor, attorney, Esquire,
thank you,
and all of those. Tyrone McGowan, pastor of Progressive Community Church, and soon to be Esquire, attorney McGowan as well. Man, you have contributed a lot to the conversation. I thank you so much
for having me, Doc,
for coming on the porch. And we got to do it again. I look forward to it. We're going to be talking about a whole lot of things. We've been doing this for Black History Month, which is why I got on my National Civil Rights Museum. Today, we're closing out our Black History celebration and conversations.
Yeah.
But I thank you all for joining me. And please share the news about the Parson'S Porch. The numbers are going up every week, and I really appreciate you. Stay tuned for my baby girl, 4 years old, going on 40. Lovely little convo. She has a special podcast. I love you, and meet me back here, please, next week, if you will. Once again, thank you, Pastor McGowan. Check out all the books I've recommended that you would get for the month. Of course, I'm recommending my own, and I gave you a few other recommendations as well. So get those books, and I'd love for you to make sure that you purchase one. You can scan the QR codes when they come up, and these are the books I recommended for Black History Month: The Black Church and the African American Experience, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams will be a blessing to you in getting some serious Black history. And if you're tired of celebrating the same heroes of Black history, we'll become one, and we'll add your name to the list. Have a good week.
Go to your Apple or Google Play Store and download the WVTC Gospel Radio app today. You can also say, Alexa, play WVTC Radio Skills.
Would you like to play WVTC Radio Network?
Absolutely. Download it today.
Views made on the preceding program are not those of WVTC Radio, iNetworks Communications, or their financial supporters.
Winning victory through Christ, WVTC Allsip Chicago, and iNetworks Communication Station.